An entire generation was raised on encouragement. They were told they were capable, gifted, destined to do meaningful things. They were urged to dream boldly, to pursue education diligently, and to believe that effort would be rewarded. And yet, after working earnestly, often more earnestly than expected, they find themselves unable to afford what once seemed an ordinary life. Only a generation ago, it feels, in many ways, like a grand social experiment no one knowingly volunteered for. We are speaking, of course, about millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996. Now, before one dismisses the subject with a sigh or a familiar joke about avocado toast, allow us to examine this calmly and thoughtfully. Because the matter is not merely economic, it is psychological. In 2020, the Pew Research Center confirmed something unprecedented in modern American history. Millennials were expected to be worse off financially than their parents. That single data point carries extraordinary weight. For generations, the implicit promise was simply each generation would climb a little higher than the last. Millennials inherited that promise, but many discovered that the latter had quietly shifted. Imagine being raised on the message, "You can be anything," only to graduate into the financial collapse of 2008. Imagine believing that education is the gateway to stability, only to discover that a master's degree costs more than a house once did. This collision between expectation and reality creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a state in which two deeply held beliefs conflict. I was told I would succeed. I have done everything I was told. Why does success feel so distant? And this tension does not disappear. It lingers. Psychologist Jean Twenge explored this generational dynamic in her book, Generation Me. Her findings revealed something intriguing. Millennials scored higher on measures of narcissism compared to previous generations, but they also scored higher on anxiety and depression. At first glance, those traits appear contradictory. How can one feel exceptional and inadequate at the same time? Yet that paradox is precisely the point. When self-esteem is nurtured expansively in childhood, but adulthood delivers economic instability, the result is not arrogance, it is confusion. A person may believe they were meant for significance, while simultaneously questioning their own worth. It is not vanity, it is whiplash. Consider the timeline. Millennials were raised during the height of the self-esteem movement of the 1980s and 1990s. Parenting philosophies emphasized affirmation. Schools rewarded participation. Encouragement flowed freely. These were not misguided intentions. They were sincere efforts to raise confident children based on the best psychological thinking available at the time. Then came adulthood. The 2008 recession reshaped the job market. Stable career paths became contract roles. Pensions quietly vanished. Entry-level positions demanded years of experience. College tuition had multiplied dramatically. Many young adults stepped into the workforce carrying significant debt and limited security. When a generation prepares for one world and encounters another, the mind must adapt. Psychologists refer to this kind of disruption as schema violation. When your fundamental understanding of how life works no longer aligns with reality, it changes more than finances, it changes trust. Millennials are often described as both idealistic and cynical. They still believe fairness is possible. They simply no longer assume it is guaranteed. And then there is technology. Millennials were the first generation to grow into adulthood. Alongside social media, Facebook launched in 2004. Instagram followed in 2010. These platforms did not arrive after identity was formed. They arrived during its formation. Young adults learned not only how to build careers and relationships, but how to present their lives to an audience. Every milestone became a post, every setback, a quiet comparison. Psychologist Tim Kassar has shown through his research that when individuals base their self-worth on external validation, status, image, approval, their well-being declines. Social media, in essence, institutionalized external validation. It created a continuous performance environment. The audience never leaves. The metrics never close. At the same time, traditional milestones, marriage, home ownership, children have been delayed. Surveys consistently showed that millennials still value these goals. They have not rejected them. Yet economic conditions make achieving them increasingly difficult without significant financial support or exceptional luck. When adulthood's traditional markers remain out of reach, something subtle happens. The brain remains in a prolonged state of preparation. Psychologists call this allostatic LODA, chronic stress response, activated by ongoing uncertainty. It is the feeling of waiting for life to begin, while already living it. Picture being in your mid-30s or early 40s, responsible and hardworking, yet feeling as though you are still starting out. That sensation is not immaturity. It is structural delay. Workplace behavior reflects this adaptation as well. Millennials are often criticized for changing jobs frequently. Yet corporate structures evolved long before millennials entered them. Long-term loyalty diminished. Layoffs became routine strategy. Benefits were reduced. In such an environment, mobility is not rebellion, it is survival. It is a rational response to instability. Yet there is another dimension often overlooked. Millennials are among the most educated and diverse generations in history. They grew up with the internet not as passive consumers, but as participants. They learned early that information has multiple perspectives. They witnessed institutions being questioned in real time. Critical thinking in systems unaccustomed to scrutiny can be mistaken for entitlement. But questioning established norms is not defiance by default. It is engagement. In matters of mental health, millennials have made a quiet but profound shift. Therapy is no longer whispered about. Anxiety and depression are discussed openly, not as character flaws, but as human experiences. That cultural change is significant. It reduces shame and invites support. However, it unfolds against a backdrop of economic strain, housing costs that have dramatically outpaced wages, and growing global concerns. And yes, there is the matter of the future. Millennials are the first generation to come of age with constant exposure to climate projections, global instability, and rapid technological transformation. Climate anxiety is now recognized as a legitimate psychological response. Being told one must fix the planet while possessing limited institutional power can create a sense of responsibility mixed with helplessness. It is not weakness to feel concern about existential issues. It is awareness. When one steps back and observes the broader pattern, the psychology becomes predictable. High expectations, economic disruption, public performance pressure, delayed milestones, global uncertainty. Under such conditions, increased anxiety is not surprising. It is human. Millennials are not uniquely fragile. They are uniquely positioned at a historical crossroads, raised in one economic narrative, matured in another, and now navigating a world transforming at unprecedented speed. If anything, their responses reflect adaptation. They invest in experiences over possessions. They question authority structures. They prioritize mental health. They value flexibility in work. These are not signs of failure. They are recalibrations. Every generation carries its defining tension. For millennials, that tension lies between promise and reality, between belief in fairness and lived unpredictability, between being told they are extraordinary and being confronted with ordinary constraints. Understanding this does not require agreement with every critique. It simply requires empathy. When the landscape shifts beneath you, and the map you were given no longer matches the terrain, confusion is natural. Adjustment takes time, and perhaps, rather than asking why millennials feel anxious or why they have not replicated their parents' milestones, a more thoughtful question would be, given the circumstances, how remarkably steady they have remained. If this reflection resonated with you, consider continuing the conversation. Thoughtful discussions such as these benefit from engagement, and your support is always sincerely appreciated.